Hello, so we're with Kirk Knoerschild. We're going to talk a little bit about architecture. So how has architecture changed with the introduction of agile processes?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. Early in the agile adoption phase or the agile movement, there wasn't a lot of discussion surrounding architecture, and I guess only recently, within the last couple of years, has that discussion emerged with agilists saying that yes, we do architecture. Recognizing that they don't emphasize big architecture up front or big design up front, but really more a notion of emergent architecture. Unfortunately, while I believe the Agile community has done a pretty good job saying that they embrace architecture, there isn't a lot of information available surrounding the practices and the techniques and the principles that an agile architect would apply to create a system that had an agile architecture. So while saying we do it, I'm not convinced that there is a good suite of resources available that clearly explain what agile architecture actually means.
Right, so that's the continuing evolution of agile itself and of the field in general.
Correct. And I believe that, over the course of the next few years, I would anticipate that the ideas surrounding agile architecture, the principles, the practices, the techniques, will begin to emerge, and the communities will form that begin to discuss this notion. I'm actually a little surprised at this point that nobody has really jumped on this bandwagon, got it moving, and increased the visibility of the movement. I know of specific individuals who are interested in agile architecture, but there isn't this strong movement surrounding agile architecture that we see within other areas, within the agile movement, such as the Kanban and lean software development,
or even testing. Initially,
yeah.
There was some. Yeah. What is the role of a tester in an agile team? And
yeah, that's a really good example.
Kind of have that kind of worked out, and of course in agile every team is different, and that's part of the whole agile thing. Is it's not a cookie cutter process, so you have to do what's appropriate for the team and the process,
exactly,
the products you're building and the environment that you're in, and so forth.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, aside from the agile aspect, how do you see the role of the architect or architecture changing with kind of the new languages we have on the JVM or other platforms? How do you think that's going to change in the future?
Well, I think there's a few different ways to answer that question. And one way is I think there's multiple facets to architecture that we don't fully recognize at this point. And there's the process aspect to architecture, and the steps that we go through to craft the architecture. There is a social aspect to architecture. The relationship and the collaborations, the roles and responsibilities of the architect and his or her relation to other members of the team. And many of us have heard of this ivory tower architect that throws their grand designs down from the tower above. And obviously as agile architecture continues to mature, the idea of the ivory tower architect will hopefully subside, go away. And then there's the temporal aspect of architecture, and that is the point at which we make the important architectural decisions. And by that I mean, it's an indictment of big architecture up front. So there's the structural, there's the temporal, and there's the social aspect. The other way to look at it is that of in the context of lean. And in the context of lean, they talk about reversible and irreversible decisions.
Right.
And the notion that we really want to try to make as many architectural decisions as reversible as possible. And those decisions that we deem irreversible, we should make those decisions as late as possible when we have as much knowledge as is necessary.
Yeah, the last responsible
The
moment.
last responsible moment, exactly. And the tie-in there with some of the new technologies, the dynamic languages, functional languages, new frameworks, is that as these new technologies emerge, it's important to understand or have a feel for where they fit within the context of the social structure, the temporal structure as far as when decisions need to be made, and then the structural aspect of architecture as well.
Right. Right. So as an architect, as you kind of keep track of all the big moving pieces in a project, what's the relationship with the development side of the project? Because often developers kind of have their own ideas about how architecture works. Can you talk a little bit about how that data flows both ways sometimes?
Yeah, and I think that the key there is that both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And traditionally, or I should say in dysfunctional organizations, at least that I've seen, the line of communication is really one way, and that is from the architect to the developer. And that's really that notion of ivory tower. In a more functional organization, the line of communication is two-way. The architect communicates with the developer, and the developer communicates back to the architect. And there is a mutual level of respect there.
Right, because they have different views of the system. The architect has the broad view of all the moving parts, whereas the developer may have a view of just their slice of the.
That is correct.
Of the world.
And I also feel to a great extent that while we've really formalized the role of architect, I feel to a great extent that architect is a derivation of the developer role, and that the knowledge and experience gained as a developer is what makes a good architect an architect, but that they should still work diligently to maintain that knowledge. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean nothing wrong with an architect jumping into code every now and then, maybe coding some of the more complex areas of the system, mentoring junior developers, plumbing code.
Working on a spike.
Working exactly, a technology proof or spike, and of course making the tough decisions with input from the team.
Right. Excellent. So sounds like architects right now are getting more varied set of things to do.
Yeah, I think that I do believe that an architect should be able to wear many hats on the development team. That is something that I do believe. Unfortunately, many architects become architects because they don't want to code anymore, and it really ties into, I believe, the career path of a programmer, of which many organizations do a poor job of providing a real growth path for their developers.
A technical career path.
A technical career path. You can either branch off into management, and that fits for some folks. Mm-hmm. But there are other folks who want to stay a bit closer to the technology. And one of the ways to do that is to move into this pigeonholed architect role, as it's defined with its rigid roles and responsibilities within many organizations. And I believe that's part of the problem that we face.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. I appreciate it.